soccer players. Soccer technical skills during match play, maximum voluntary isometric contraction and power of lower limbs, jumping ability, and endurance parameters were assessed in 30 prepubescent male soccer players with the same experience in soccer training. Subjects were divided into two groups of 15 children, a younger group, YG, aged 9.4 plus or minus 0.3 years, and an older group, OG, aged 11.8 plus or minus 0.2 years. Correlations between technical and physiological parameters were also described. Significant difference was set at p is less than 0.05. Differences between YG and OG appeared in physiological performance, mainly in VO2 peak expressed in absolute values. VO2 at different speeds, perceived exertion in a treadmill test, jump performance, strength, and peak power of lower limbs. Among the technical skills measured, significant differences were found only in heading. The differences found between groups showed that most physical capabilities that were measured here have an important increase during the first stages of puberty, pointing out that the specific training at these ages is necessary to get an appropriate basis for future performance. Besides, over 30% of technical performance was measured in the study can be explained with the physiological parameters. The data showed in this paper helped to determine the most important capacities in youth soccer, which can facilitate the development of more appropriate selection models of training. Introduction. In soccer, physiological and technical skills are both important for performance. Different parameters such as explosive type efforts, maximal strength, and aerobic endurance have been described as important factors in soccer performance. Nevertheless, and although there have been some recent attempts, there is a lack of studies evaluating technical responses of soccer players, and this kind of information about young players is even more scarce. This may appear quite surprising when considering that technical parameters can decide the results of a soccer match. In the past years, some studies have tried to develop multidisciplinary select models for young players by testing endurance, strength, soccer-specific skills, flexibility, and speed. However, the tasks suggest to measure technical skills have always been performed in artificial soccer conditions, not during a real match. When the profile of young soccer players has been defined in real match conditions, technical skills have been either ignored or measured in a quantitative way, thus losing the meaning of the technical action. The success of technical skills depends on a series of factors such as coordination, decision-making, time, and cognitive knowledge. There have been some attempts made to try to study those parameters individually. The differences in accuracy and speed for a complex motor skill, a fast, controlled movement, have been studied in two female soccer groups with different experience levels, but no differences between groups have been found. Cognitive knowledge has also been studied in soccer players, but we know of no research that has measured the accuracy of technical skills during match play in children. On the other hand, endurance may also be an important factor in soccer performance because of the length of a soccer match and the need to play the whole match. This is why endurance has been largely studied in soccer. For example, in professional players, either by developing special trainings or by describing their endurance characteristics. The literature discussing this parameter in young athletes is also abundant. For example, to establish the endurance profile of a soccer match, or as in the professional case, to develop special endurance trainings or to determine the endurance profile of young players. However, there has been concluded that although it can be useful, endurance performance by itself is insufficient for prediction of later performance in young soccer players. Another important factor in these studies about soccer performance is strength, though there is no agreement about the most adequate method to measure it. Some studies use maximum repetitions, whereas others use the height in a vertical jump. In young players, vertical jumps and isokinetic tests are frequently carried out, but there are hardly any data about isometric strength or power, despite being those two methods common in other sports. The purpose of the study was to offer some insight into the factors contributing to success in soccer, combining two different points of view, the physiological and the technical ones. This could lead to a better understanding of this game, and thus to more appropriate methods of training and selection models in youth. To fulfill this objective, soccer technical skills during match play, strength and power of lower limbs, and jumping ability and aerobic qualities were evaluated in two different age groups of prepubescent soccer players. It is hypothesized that the older children will have higher values in the physiological test, but not in the technical performance because experience and level between groups were identical. The correlations between physiological and technical parameters will also be evaluated. Methods. Experimental approach to the problem. To have a better understanding of factors contributing to success in youth soccer, two groups of young soccer players with 2 years difference were assessed for endurance, strength, and technical performance during the last 2 months of the season and 2 weeks after the season. Endurance data were taken in a maximum treadmill test and included VO2 peak, oxygen uptake at different progressive treadmill speeds, Borg scale for perceived exertion, and ventilatory anaerobic threshold, AT. Strength measurements included jumping ability, leg maximum voluntary isometric contraction, MVIC, and leg peak power. Technical evaluations were carried out by 3 experts who had to fill in a sheet concerning different technical skills during 4 different matches for every player. Anthropometric assessments were also carried out for every subject. Differences between groups and correlations between technical and physiological parameters were calculated. The dependent variables selected for this study to define physical performance, VO2 max, AT, treadmill speeds, Borg scale, jump performance, and isometric strength, and peak power of lower limbs are all commonly used in evaluation of soccer players, whereas those chosen to define the technical performance, shooting, passing, dribbling, ball control, heading, and tackling, are the most executed actions in soccer games. Subjects. A total of 30 male subjects were selected for the study, 15 for the younger group, YG, and 15 for the older group, OG. All of them played in 4 different regional soccer schools of Lyon, Spain. At the time of the study, the children had to be playing in the under 10 category to be a member of the YG, whereas the OG subjects had to do the same in the under 12 category. All the participants were field players free from injury that might have affected their performance on the test and matches. To be able to take part in the study, all the children, independently of age, had to have 4 years of soccer training, so experience was the same between groups. At the time of the study and during all their training experience, all the subjects were training twice per week and playing 1 competition match on the weekend. The Institutional Review Board of the University of Lyon approved the study before data collection. All participants and their parents were informed of the purpose and possible risks involved in the study before giving their informed written consent for participation. Maturity status of the children were determined by self-assessment of genital and pubic hair development according to the criteria of Tanner, a methodological already validated by others. The YG subjects rated themselves between Tanner stages 1 and 2 for both criteria, whereas most of the OG children, and 12, rated themselves between Tanner stages 3 and 4, also for both criteria. Tanner stage 2 in OG 3. The characteristics of the subjects can be seen in Table 1. Procedures. 4 competition matches of every soccer school where the subjects played were recorded to evaluate the technical performance. The technical assessment was performed by 3 expert coaches with over 10 years of experience in young soccer. All of them watched and recorded matches twice to evaluate the children of the study. Each expert had to fill in a technical sheet for every subject by giving points from 1 to 100 to different technical parameters: shooting, passing, dribbling, ball control, heading, and tackling. Before data collection, specific observational training was given to the coaches to establish the scoring criteria, and the results were discussed until consensus was reached. In addition, once the season was finished, both age groups played 2 matches against each other with 1 week difference. Substitutions previously determined to allow all subjects to play the game time during each match. The final results of the match were taken as a performance index. The physiological tests were performed in 2 days of different weeks during the last month of the season. Ergospirometry was performed on the first day, and the other measurements were made on the second day. All the measurements were performed at the same time of the day, in the same order. Day 1. After a familiarization on the treadmill, Power Jog M30 Sport Engineering Limited, Birmingham, United Kingdom, an incremental protocol was carried out with an initial speed of 5 kilometers an hour. And increments of 1 kilometer an hour every minute until exhaustion. The slope was kept constant at 1.5 degrees during the test, and gas exchange was analyzed breath by breath. Medical graphics, CPX, Max, St. Paul, Minnesota, USA. Heart rate was also measured using heart rate monitors. Polar, S810, Electro, Kempel, Finland. VO2 was determined using specific criteria for children: a heart rate greater than 195 beats per minute, or a respiratory quotient greater than 1 at maximal effort. The perceived exertion was also verified every time the speed was increased, and just at the end of the test, using the Borg scale of 15 items, the subjects were trained in the use of the protocol before the test. Once all the data was stored, the oxygen uptake, expressed as milliliters per kilogram a minute, at the different speeds of the test were calculated for each subject by taking the mean oxygen uptake of the last 20 seconds of every sample complete load. The ventilatory AT was also estimated for every subject using the V-slope technique. Day 2. Weight was determined with a 0.1 kilogram precision calibrated scale, Cobalt M20, Barcelona, Spain. Height was measured within 0.1 centimeter precision using a wall-mounted tape measure, M01152, Seca scale, Lafayette Instrumentation Company, Lafayette, Indiana, USA. A skinfold caliper, Holtain, Dyfed, UK, was used to determine the triceps, subscapular, biceps, chest, suprailiac, abdominal, thigh, and calf skin folds within 0.1 millimeter precision. After data collection, the percentage of body fat was assessed by using the Slaughter equation. Besides, 2 indicators of adiposity were established with the sum of 5 and 4 skin folds, both already used in children. Anthropometric assessments of the study were done according to the American College of Sports Medicine. After a cyclometer, Taturi F35, Turku, Finland, and stretching warm-up, 5 vertical jumping protocols were performed. The first one was the squat jump, SJ, with the starting position of 90-degree knee flexion, followed by the counter movement jump, CMG, both performed with hands on hips. The third jump was the drop jump, DJ, consisting of dropping oneself from a specific height, in our case a box of 20 centimeters, and jumping as high as possible after landing. The jump is performed with hands on hips. The fourth jump was the CMJ with the arm swing, CMJ-A. It is similar to the CMJ, except the hands are not on the hips, allowing the arms to make an impulsive movement. The last jumping test was the repeat jump test of 30 seconds, RJ30, which consisted of a sequence of CMJ during a period of 30 seconds. The children trained all the jumps introduced as a part of the warm-up protocol of the training, several times during the 2 weeks before the study. Furthermore, proper explanation were given at the time of the test, and practical demonstration by experts if necessary. With this, the subjects were able to perform the jumping test with an appropriate technique. All the jumps were performed on a contact platform, Globus Ergotester, Cologne, Italy. Every subject performed each jump 3 times, except the RJ30, which was done only once. The best of the 3 trials was recorded for final analysis. The recovery time determined was 1 minute between 2 jumps of the same type and 3 minutes between one jump modality and the next one. Once the jumping data was stored, the pre-stretch augmentation was calculated to evaluate the stretch shortening cycle. SSC, performance pre-stretch augmentation percentage, equals CMJ minus SJ times SJ times 100. After the jumping test, the subjects sat on a 45 inclination leg press, Jerva Sport, Madrid, Spain, and rested there for 5 minutes before the leg strength and power measurements. First, the MVIC test was carried out. It consisted of a pushing against the platform of the press as hard as possible, trying to move the platform, which was kept fixed with 2 chains. Between those chains, a strain gauge, globus ergometry, Codone in Italy, was placed to measure the isometric strength of both legs. The chosen angle was 120 degrees, manually measured with a goniometer, Tech, Barcelona, Spain. Each participant performed 2 attempts, and the best of these was the one considered for further data analysis. The subjects rested while sitting on the 45 inclination leg press for 3 minutes after the MVIC test. Then, to measure the peak power of the lower limbs, the subjects were asked to push 3 times as fast as possible on the platform of the leg press with the 40% of the value obtained in the MVIC test. This methodology has been described before, showing that the maximal peak power is reached between 40 and 60% of the MVIC. In this study, 40% was chosen because the youth of the subjects. A rotary encoded globus real power, Codone, Italy, was adapted to the platform. The data were stored on a computer for further analysis, and the best of the 3 attempts was taken into account for the results. Finally, the subjects performed a 5-minute cooling down after the leg power test, which consisted mainly of stretching the lower limbs. Statistical analysis. Data were now analyzed using the SPSS version 15.0 statistical software, SPSS Incorporated, Chicago, Illinois, USA. Once normal distribution of the data was verified with the Kolmogorov-Smirnov test, an independent t-test was used to examine different groups for all the variables. Besides, correlational analysis was made, calculating Pearson's correlation coefficient among the different technical and physiological variables measured. Significant differences were determined when p is less than or equal to 0.05. Results are expressed as means. Results. The mean values for stature, body mass, percent body fat, and indicators of adiposity of both groups can be seen in Table 1. Height and weight were significantly greater for the OG, whereas percent of body fat and both indicators of adiposity were not. The 2 matches of the groups played against each other were won by the OG with the following results: 4-2 in the first match and 5-3 in the second one. The mean results in the technical evaluations of the 4 competition matches for the OG are as follows: shooting 60 plus 1 plus or minus 10.8, passing 57.6 plus or minus 8.9, dribbling 58.5 plus or minus 13.9, ball control 56.6 plus or minus 12.6, heading 54.5 plus or minus 11.7, and tackling 57.8 plus or minus 11.7. The results for the YG for these parameters are as follows: shooting 57.8 plus or minus 9.2, passing 55.6 plus or minus 8.7, dribbling 54.8 plus or minus 11.9, ball control 61.7 plus or minus 7.6, heading 46.2 plus or minus 4.9, and tackling 64.7 plus or minus 8. Significant differences between both groups appeared only for heading. The maximum heart rate for the OG was 207.9 plus or minus 9.1 beats per minute, and the YG was 206.5 plus or minus 14.7 beats per minute. The maximum treadmill speed reached by the OG subjects was 13.3 plus or minus 1.3 kilometers per hour, whereas the YG children reached a maximum speed of 11.9 plus or minus 1 kilometer an hour. With significant differences between both groups for this parameter, the perceived exertion of the end of the treadmill test was 18.1 plus or minus 2.1 for the OG and 18.8 plus or minus 1.4 for the YG. The results of the treadmill test concerning the VO2 peak can be seen in Figure 1, and those concerning the AT expressed as treadmill speed and as percentage of the maximum speed are shown in Figure 2. Significant differences were found between groups in VO2 peak expressed in absolute value but not in relative ones. Significant differences also appeared in the AT, where they expressed as percentage of VO2 peak and as speed in kilometers an hour, but not in percentage of the maximum speed reached in the treadmill. Figure 3 shows the results of the VO2 at different speeds during the first 7 minutes of the treadmill test, where significant differences appear between OG and YG for every load. Results from minute 8 on are not relevant because the number of the subjects of the YG that could not complete this load were too low. Lowest N for YG for minute 1 through 7 and 10, minute 8 and 4. The results of the Borg's rating, perceived exertional scale, can be seen in figure 4. Only the first 7 minutes have been taken into account for the results because of the lower number of the children in the YG that could compete higher loads. See paragraph above. Except in the first minute, significant differences between groups were recorded for every load. The mean values of the two groups, OG and YG, for each jumping protocol and the pre-stets augmentation ones are shown in Table 2. Significant differences between groups appeared in SJ, CMJ, and CMJA, but not in DJ and RJ30. The results of the pre-stretch augmentation also showed significant differences between both groups, with the YG presenting higher values in this parameter. Figure 5 shows the isometric leg strength and peak power results for the groups of the study. Significant differences were seen between OG and YG for both parameters. Correlations found between the technical and physiological parameters that were measured in the study can be seen in Table 3. Discussion. As was predicted, the OG was significantly taller and heavier than the YG. The percentage of body fat was similar for both groups. To calculate this, the Slaughter equation was used, which, despite being questioned, is one of the most widely used for young population. In addition, the sum of the skin folds has also been used as an indicator of adiposity in some recent studies. Comparing our results concerning the sum of 4 skin folds and others, the subjects of this study would be between obese and non-obese children. The further information about the subjects in the present study, data concerning the sum of the 5 skin folds, were also compared with the results of other young soccer players. Doing so, the children of this research would fit in the non-elite regional group where they were actually playing. As for the technical actions performed during the match, we consider that a traditional method of measuring the quantitative may be inadequate because it does not take into account their quality. So a system was developed to get an insight into the real technical level of every player. We selected the most common technical skills that take place during a soccer match, and 3 experts gave points to every player after watching them playing 4 matches. The traditional measurements of distance covered by a player at different speeds were not carried out because the main purpose of the authors was to estimate the technical performance, not the work rate of the players. It was hypothesized that the OG and YG would have similar values in the technical evaluations because of their similar experience and level. Significant differences between groups were only found for heading. The results confirmed that the experience at the level are 2 important parameters to determine the technical performance in soccer, because of the first one was the same for both groups. 4 years, and the level was also the same between YG and OG, regional level, each one in its age group. Our results support the idea exposed by others about the importance of level and the significance of training experience. When analyzing technical performance, taking these and the performance index results into account, it seems that when the technical level is similar in 2 different soccer teams, the physical capacity plays a key role. Although the protocol carried out here is to assess the technical performance has limited, it can be an adequate way to obtain data about the technical level of different players, and it can also help to fill in the gap between the scientists and the coaches in soccer. But more studies need to be done to confirm this data. VO2 peak has been described as an important factor to increase performance in soccer players. It has also been described that VO2 peak expressed in absolute values increases with maturation. But when it is related to body mass, the results are controversial. In this study, significant differences were found in VO2 peak between OG and the YG when expressed in absolute values. But those differences disappeared when the results were expressed in relative values concerning body mass. Although the difference in absolute values in children of different ages is often explained by the hemoglobin concentration, others considered that the increase in the number and size of the fibers is the more important. When the results are compared with other studies that analyze the VO2 peak in children of the same age that were not soccer players, it can be seen that the values of VO2 peak of the groups of the present study are higher than those subjects of the same age and did not play soccer. However, when comparing the results of the YG and the OG with soccer players of the same age or even professionals, the values obtained are similar, consolidating the idea that soccer players must have a VO2 peak between 55 and 70 milliliters a kg per minute. About the AT, there are not much data, but our results are similar to those previously recorded in soccer players. However, there is no consensus about the method that is to be used to determine this parameter, generating a great variety of results. So it is necessary to be careful when comparing results of AT. The VO2 at different speeds in the treadmill test was also measured. We found significant differences between YG and OG for every treadmill load between 5 and 11 kilometers an hour. This can be partly explained because of the length of the lower extremities, which is similar in the YG. The last measurement that was carried out in the treadmill was the perceived exertion with Borg scale. The YG presented significantly higher values from minute 2 to minute 7, speeds 6 and 11 kilometers an hour, which can indicate that YG perceived a higher physiological load for the same exertional load. These results were in contrast with the ones obtained by others, where young children presented lower values than did older subjects following a similar protocol. Jumping protocols are often used in strength evaluation of soccer players. 5 jumping protocols were carried out in this investigation, which showed that the OG, older group, children's jumps were significantly higher than the YG, younger groups, children's jumps in 3 of them. Comparing our results with those of the other studies, the height achieved by our subjects in the SQ and CMJ counter movement jumps is similar to that archived by other soccer players at the time of age. The SSC was also determined using the pre-stretch augmentation. The results showed that the YG exhibited significantly higher values than the OG. This would indicate that muscle tendon complex structures were more compliant in younger soccer players, making them improve their use of elastic energy, allowing for a greater performance during SSC. Even so, YG achieved lower heights in CMJ, which means that other parameters are more important in jumping performance than in SSC, such as force generation capacity, reuse of energy, and the effect of different muscles. However, this more compliant tendon structure could explain why there are no significant differences between groups. Strength in children can be measured using different protocols. In soccer, there is no agreement about which is best method to determine this capacity, or which makes it difficult to compare results among studies. One of those strength protocols is isometric strength test. It is frequently used to determine the MVIC force in athletes. Here, an isometric test was used because it was easy to perform, something important when working with athletes without resistance training experience. The results showed that OG had significantly higher values than the YG for the MVIC of the lower limbs. Comparing the results with the ones given for elite young soccer players of similar age, it can be seen that YG and OG exhibited lower values for the MVIC of both legs. This can partly explain the differences concerning level. However, there are several factors that influence the performance in an isometric test, the joint angle being one of the most important. In the mentioned study, this parameter is not explained, which could lead to misunderstanding. We standardized the knee angle at 120 degrees, which is in the range given to measure the function of the knee extensor. peak power is an important factor in soccer because of its short and explosive actions that this sport requires. However, although jumping performance can give some insight into it, few studies have tested it. Normally, a cyclometer test is carried out to check the peak power of the lower extremities. But cycling motor patterns can vary different from those of soccer. An already validated methodology was followed here to get the information about leg peak power, although this test had not been carried out with soccer players yet. It was found that OG exhibited significantly higher values than the YG, something we expected. We can conclude that peak power, as was measured here, may be a performance index in soccer, though further studies with players of different ages and levels need to be done to confirm this hypothesis. As for the correlations that were found between the technical and physiological parameters measured in the study, see Table 3, over 30% of the physiological variables that were measured have relationship with the technical ones. Underlying maximum aerobic power, VO2 peak, expressed in relative values concerning body mass. The performance of the RJ30 and the DJ is also necessary to emphasize that the sum of the 4 and 5 skinfold negatively correlate with half of the technical parameters, which indicates that adiposity is a factor to take into account in soccer performance, something already established by some soccer selection models. The correlation explained above showed that the technical skills used in soccer include more parameters than physiological ones. Learning skills in physiological and other motor skills should be included in soccer techniques. More studies have to be done to determine the real factors that can explain soccer and other team sport techniques to let young players achieve high goals of performance. Practical applications. The results of the present study may help soccer professionals to assess performance in this sport from two important points of view, the physiological and the technical one. The latter has sometimes forgotten because of its difficulty to provide a valuable data. This study offers an easy method to assess technical performances of soccer players. From the physiological view, the present study may provide useful information on the physical capacities of young soccer players, which can help to understand the player's performance capabilities. Besides, an already validated methodology to measure leg peak power is applied here with soccer players, which can give some insight into such an important parameter for soccer performance. Finally, this study gives some valuable ideas about how different important capacities for success in soccer evolve through the first stages of puberty. Acknowledgements. The authors would like to thank the M.A. Diaz-Fernandez for her help in writing this paper.